When you picture the Battle of Britain, you see Spitfires. Sleek, graceful, elegant machines dancing through English skies, shooting down German bombers, saving the nation through superior technology and pilot courage. The Spitfire is the symbol of British resistance in 1940, immortalised in films, books, memorials, and national memory. Churchill praised the few who saved Britain, and everyone assumes he meant Spitfire pilots. The reality is different and more interesting. During the Battle of Britain, Hawker Hurricanes shot down more German aircraft than all other British defences combined, more than Spitfires, more than anti-aircraft guns, more than any other system. Hurricanes equipped more squadrons, flew more sorties, and bore the heaviest burden of Britain's air defence. The Hurricane was the workhorse, while the Spitfire was the show horse, and workhorses win wars. Yet history remembers the Spitfire and forgets the Hurricane, an injustice that obscures how Britain actually survived 1940. This is the story of the Hawker Hurricane, the unglamorous, practical, brutally effective fighter that shot down more enemy aircraft than any other British weapon system, that kept flying when Spitfires were grounded for repairs, that could be built faster and maintained easier, that pilots loved for its stability and forgiveness, and that ultimately mattered more than the elegant fighter that stole its glory. The Hurricane saved Britain, and it's time Britain remembered. The Hurricane's story begins in the mid-1930s, when the Royal Air Force desperately needed modern fighters to replace obsolete biplanes. British air defences in 1935 consisted of fabric-covered biplanes with open cockpits, fixed landing gear, and maximum speeds around 200 mph. German rearmament was producing modern bombers that could fly faster than British fighters could intercept them. The situation was dire, and the Air Ministry knew it. Sidney Cam, chief designer at Hawker Aircraft, proposed a revolutionary design, a monoplane fighter with enclosed cockpit retractable landing gear and 8 machine guns. The armament was crucial. Existing fighters carried 2 guns, which provided insufficient firepower to destroy modern bombers quickly. 8 guns could deliver devastating concentrated fire that would shred bomber structures in seconds. The Air Ministry was skeptical but desperate. They ordered a prototype, and in November 1935, the Hurricane flew for the first time. It was fast, over 300 mph faster than any RAF fighter in service. It was maneuverable, responsive controls, stable platform, forgiving handling. It was heavily armed 8.303 Browning machine guns with 2 800 rounds of ammunition. And critically, it was practical, built using traditional methods with fabric-covered wings and a steel tube fuselage that could be manufactured quickly and repaired easily. The Hurricane wasn't cutting-edge technology. It was proven technology applied intelligently to create a fighter that could be mass-produced by factories that understood traditional construction methods. The Spitfire, designed by Reginald Mitchell at Supermarine, was more advanced. It featured all-metal monocoque construction, elliptical wings for superior aerodynamics and performance that exceeded the Hurricane in speed and altitude. The Spitfire was faster, could climb higher, had better high-altitude performance. It was also harder to build. The complex curves and stressed skin construction required specialized tooling and skilled workers. It was harder to repair. Battle damage to the monocoque structure required factory-level work, while Hurricane's fabric and tube construction could be patched by squadron ground crews using basic tools. The Spitfire was theoretically superior, but the Hurricane was practically superior for the needs Britain faced in 1940. Britain needed fighters, immediately needed them in quantity, needed them repairable in the field, needed them flyable by average pilots. The Hurricane met all those requirements. The Spitfire met some of them. Production numbers tell the story. When the Battle of Britain began in July 1940, RAF Fighter Command had approximately 32 Hurricane squadrons and 19 Spitfire squadrons. The disparity reflects production rates. Hurricanes could be built faster, using existing manufacturing infrastructure, while Spitfires required specialized facilities that took time to establish. Throughout the battle, Hurricane production exceeded Spitfire production, ensuring that losses could be replaced and new squadrons formed. This numerical advantage meant Hurricanes bore the majority of defensive burden. When German raids came in, more Hurricanes were available to intercept them. When fighters were lost in combat, more Hurricanes were available to replace them. The Hurricane's producibility was strategic advantage that mattered as much as performance characteristics. Air Marshal Hugh Dowding, commanding Fighter Command, understood this. He valued the Hurricane precisely because he could have more of them, and quantity has a quality all its own. The tactical employment of Hurricanes versus Spitfires reflected their different capabilities. Fighter Command doctrine during the Battle of Britain generally assigned Hurricanes to attack bomber formations, while Spitfires engaged German fighter escorts. This made operational sense. Hurricanes were rugged and heavily armed, ideal for attacking large bomber formations where taking hits was likely, but sustained firepower was essential. Spitfires were faster and more maneuverable at high altitude, ideal for dogfighting with Bf-109 fighters. But doctrine wasn't always followed, and often Hurricanes fought enemy fighters and Spitfires attacked bombers. The key point is that Hurricanes were trusted with the primary mission, stopping German bombers from reaching their targets. That was what mattered, not aerial duels with fighters, but preventing bombers from destroying British cities, factories and airfields. The Hurricane was optimized for that mission. Pilot accounts consistently praised the Hurricane's handling characteristics. It was stable, forgiving, easy to fly. Pilots described it as a gentleman's aircraft that didn't bite or surprise you with unexpected behavior. The wide-track landing gear made takeoffs and landings easier, reducing accidents. The visibility from the cockpit was excellent, better than the Spitfires in some aspects, particularly over the nose during approaches. The controls were harmonious and responsive without being twitchy. For young pilots with minimal training, and by mid-1940, many RAF pilots had minimal training because experienced pilots were scarce. The Hurricane was safer to fly than higher performance fighters that punish mistakes. This matters in war. A fighter that's 5% faster but kills trainees during training is net negative compared to slightly slower fighter that lets average pilots survive long enough to become experienced. The Hurricane kept pilots alive long enough to learn, and those pilots then became effective fighter pilots who shot down German aircraft. The Hurricane's gun platform was exceptionally stable. 8 machine guns generated significant recoil when fired simultaneously, but the Hurricane's mass and structural strength absorbed it without disturbing aim. Pilots could hold the trigger down and walk fire across enemy bombers, confident that rounds were going where aimed. The convergence point, the distance at which all 8 guns' fire intersected, was typically set at 250 yards, creating a cone of fire that was devastating to anything inside it. Bomber formations caught in Hurricane fire were shredded aircraft breaking apart under sustained fire engines, failing fuel tanks igniting. The Hurricane's firepower wasn't subtle. It was blunt force trauma delivered through 8 machine guns, and it worked. German bomber crews feared Hurricanes because they knew that if a Hurricane got into firing position, their aircraft was likely doomed. The numbers are unambiguous. During the Battle of Britain, Hurricanes are credited with destroying approximately 593 German aircraft. Spitfires are credited with approximately 133. All other defenses, anti-aircraft guns, other fighter types account for the remainder of German losses. The Hurricane shot down more enemy aircraft than any other system by significant margin. This wasn't because Hurricane pilots were better or braver. Pilot quality was distributed across both Hurricane and Spitfire squadrons. It was because there were more Hurricanes, they flew more sorties, they were available more often, and they were specifically tasked with attacking the bombers that were the primary threat. The Hurricane's kill ratio was lower than the Spitfire's. Hurricanes lost more aircraft relative to kills than Spitfires did, but absolute numbers matter more than ratios in defensive warfare. Britain didn't need to achieve favourable exchange ratios. Britain needed to stop German bombers, and Hurricanes stopped more German bombers than anything else. The Hurricane's durability was combat advantage. Battle damage that would ground a Spitfire for days could be repaired on Hurricanes in hours. The fabric-covered wings could be patched with doped fabric. The steel tube fuselage could be welded or braced. Damaged components could be replaced with minimal tooling. Squadron ground crews became expert at field repairs, keeping Hurricanes flying when Spitfires needed factory work. Serviceability rates, the percentage of aircraft actually flyable on any given day, were consistently higher for Hurricanes than Spitfires. This meant that even when both types took similar casualties, more Hurricanes were available for operations the next day. In attritional warfare, where every sortie mattered, serviceability was a strategic factor. The Hurricane's old-fashioned construction method, which looked primitive compared to Spitfire's advanced design, proved superior for sustained operations under combat conditions. The myth of the Spitfire as Britain's saviour developed during and immediately after the Battle of Britain, driven by propaganda needs and genuine admiration for beautiful machine. The Spitfire was photogenic, looked fast, even standing still embodied technological sophistication and British engineering excellence. It was perfect for propaganda newspapers, published photos, films, featured Spitfires posters, showed Spitfires. The Hurricane, being less aesthetically striking, received less attention. This imbalance was reinforced by post-war narratives. Spitfire pilots wrote memoirs that became bestsellers. Spitfires were preserved in museums. Movies featured Spitfires because they looked better on camera. The Hurricane gradually faded from public memory, remembered only by aviation enthusiasts and historians who knew the actual statistics. The public narrative became, Spitfires won the Battle of Britain, which is factually wrong but emotionally satisfying because it attributes victory to technological superiority rather than unglamorous factors like mass production and practical design. The strategic situation in 1940 made the Hurricane's characteristics particularly valuable. After the fall of France in June 1940, Britain faced invasion threat and sustained bombing campaign. The Luftwaffe's strategy was to destroy Mars-Forschung, RAF Fighter Command through attrition, forcing Britain to negotiate peace or face invasion with no air defence. German attacks targeted airfields, radar stations, aircraft factories, the infrastructure of Britain's air defence. RAF Fighter Command had to preserve its strength while preventing German bombers from destroying critical targets. This required quantity enough fighters to contest every raid to maintain standing patrols to replace losses. The Hurricane's producibility and repairability meant Fighter Command could sustain operations despite mounting losses. If RAF had relied on Spitfires alone, production wouldn't have supported requirements. The Hurricane filled the gap between what was needed and what Spitfires could provide. The Battle of Britain's phases reflected German strategic shifts and RAF responses. Initially, German attacks targeted channel convoys and coastal targets. Then Luftwaffe shifted to attacking airfields and radar stations, attempting to destroy Fighter Command on the ground. Finally, frustrated by RAF's persistence, Germany shifted to bombing London and other cities, the Blitz. Throughout all phases, Hurricanes were present in greater numbers and bore heavier combat burden. During the critical August-September period, when Fighter Command came closest to defeat Hurricanes, sustained losses that would have broken smaller force, but continued operations because replacements were available. The Hurricane's contribution was absorption of attrition that otherwise would have overwhelmed Fighter Command. That's not glamorous or exciting, but it's what mattered. Wars are won by logistics and sustainability, not by aesthetics and performance specifications. Pilot perspectives reveal interesting dynamics. Spitfire pilots generally loved their aircraft and believed it was superior, which it was, in certain performance metrics. Hurricane pilots generally loved their aircraft and believed it was more reliable, more forgiving, more practical, which it was in operational context. Neither group was wrong. Both aircraft were excellent designs, suited to different priorities. The tragedy is that history remembers one and forgets the other, distorting understanding of how Britain survived in 1940. When Churchill praised the few, he meant all Fighter Command pilots, but popular memory associates the few with Spitfire pilots specifically. Hurricane pilots, who were actually the majority of the few, are erased from collective memory by association of fighter pilot with Spitfire. This is historical injustice worth correcting. The Hurricane's service extended beyond the Battle of Britain, though it's the 1940 battle that defined its legacy. Hurricanes served throughout the war in multiple theatres: North Africa, Mediterranean, Eastern Front, supplied to Soviet Union, Far East. They were adapted for various roles: fighter bomber, ground attack, tank buster, naval fighter. The Hurricane was a versatile platform that could be modified for missions beyond air superiority. This versatility reflected the fundamental soundness of the design, a strong, stable, practical aircraft that could be adapted to changing requirements. Late-war Hurricanes bore little resemblance to 1940 versions, having been upgraded with more powerful engines, better armament, armor protection, and mission-specific modifications. The Hurricane's ability to evolve kept it relevant longer than many contemporary designs. The comparison with German fighters provides context. The Luftwaffe's primary fighter in 1940 was the Messerschmitt Bf 109E, an excellent aircraft with performance roughly comparable to Spitfire. The Bf 109 was faster than Hurricane, could climb better, had superior high-altitude performance. But the Bf 109 had disadvantages. Short range meant limited time over Britain. Light armament, 2 machine guns and 2 cannon, was less effective against bombers than Hurricane's 8 machine guns. And the narrow landing gear made takeoffs and landings hazardous. German pilots respected the Hurricane as a dangerous opponent, particularly in bomber attacks where Hurricane's concentrated firepower was devastating. The Hurricane wasn't superior to Bf 109 in air-to-air combat, but it didn't need to be. Its mission was destroying bombers, and for that mission, it was optimized effectively. The production story deserves emphasis because it explains why Hurricanes were more numerous. Hawker Aircraft designed the Hurricane for mass production, using traditional methods that Britain's manufacturing base could support. Fabric-covered wings used skills from biplane production. Steel tube fuselage was familiar technology. Sub-assemblies could be manufactured by non-specialized firms and brought together for final assembly. This distributed production meant that even if one factory was bombed, production could continue elsewhere. Spitfire production, concentrated in fewer specialized facilities, was more vulnerable to disruption. The industrial logic favored Hurricane, and industrial capacity determines military capacity more reliably than design elegance. Germany learned this lesson painfully. They designed sophisticated weapons that required specialized production, limiting quantity, while Allies designed weapons that could be mass-produced, accepting somewhat lower performance for much higher quantity. The Hurricane exemplified that Allied approach. The tactical flexibility of mixed Hurricane Spitfire squadrons created interesting dynamics. Some fighter command groups employed both types, using Spitfires as high cover, while Hurricanes attacked bombers below. This worked well when coordination succeeded, but was vulnerable when German fighters bounced Hurricanes before Spitfires could intervene. The optimal tactic was probably homogeneous squadrons, all Hurricanes or all Spitfires, to avoid coordination complexity, but resource constraints meant fighter command used whatever aircraft were available, wherever they were needed. The ad hoc nature of Battle of Britain operations meant that theoretical tactics often couldn't be implemented, and squadrons did whatever seemed best, given immediate circumstances. Hurricane pilots learned to survive against superior fighters by using Hurricane's strengths: tight turning radius at lower altitudes, ruggedness that absorbed damage, and the fact that 8 machine guns could destroy a Bf 109 as effectively as they destroyed a bomber if you could get into position. The human element pilots and ground crews deserves recognition. Hurricane pilots knew they were flying the less glamorous fighter, but took pride in their unglamorous effectiveness. They called themselves the working-class fighter pilots compared to Spitfire's aristocrats. Ground crews loved Hurricanes because they were maintainable. You could fix a Hurricane with basic tools in field conditions, while Spitfires often needed factory facilities. The relationship between pilots and ground crews was closer on Hurricane squadrons because everyone appreciated that their collective efforts flying and maintaining kept the aircraft operational. This esprit de corps doesn't appear in official records, but mattered for morale and effectiveness. People fight harder for aircraft they respect and comrades they trust, and Hurricane squadrons developed both. The post-war neglect of the Hurricane is partly explained by its very success. Because Hurricanes were produced in quantity and used extensively, they were worn out by war's end. Many were scrapped immediately. Spitfires produced in smaller numbers and used more carefully were more likely to survive. Post-war RAF also preferred preserving Spitfires for symbolic reasons. They represented cutting-edge technology and British design excellence. Hurricanes represented practical compromise, less appealing for national mythology. The result is that more Spitfires survive today, creating impression through museum displays and air shows that Spitfires were more numerous, which inverts reality. Surviving aircraft create false historical narrative when survival is correlated with factors other than historical importance. The strategic impact of the Hurricane can be understood through counterfactual what-if. Britain had only Spitfires in 1940. Production would have been insufficient to equip fighter command squadrons. Losses would have exceeded replacement rates. Serviceability would have been lower because field repairs were harder. Fighter command would have been numerically weaker, possibly critically so. Germany might have achieved air superiority, making invasion feasible, or at least making bombing campaign more effective. Britain might have lost the Battle of Britain not from inferior pilots or tactics, but from inadequate numbers of fighters. The Hurricane prevented that scenario by providing the quantity that Spitfire production alone couldn't deliver. That's the Hurricane's strategic contribution. It filled the numerical gap that separated potential defeat from actual survival. The lessons from Hurricane's story extend beyond World War II. Military procurement often prioritizes performance specifications over practical considerations like producibility, maintainability, and reliability. The Hurricane demonstrates that good enough and plentiful often beats excellent but scarce. And this lesson appears repeatedly in military history. Sherman tanks versus Tigers, AK-47s, versus sophisticated Western rifles, F-16s versus F-15s. The pattern is consistent practical designs that can be mass-produced and sustained in field conditions often matter more than sophisticated designs that optimize performance. The Hurricane was the template for this approach, proving in history's most important air battle that unglamorous effectiveness beats elegant sophistication when survival is at stake. The Hurricane's pilots deserve final recognition. They flew the less glamorous fighter, received less public acclaim, and after the war were often forgotten as Spitfire pilot became synonym for Battle of Britain pilot. But they shot down more enemy aircraft, flew more sorties, and bore heavier burden. They fought in aircraft that was slower than enemy fighters but kept flying, kept fighting, kept stopping German bombers from accomplishing their missions. They survived through skill courage, an aircraft that forgave mistakes and took punishment. They saved Britain as much as Spitfire pilots did, actually more, measured by German aircraft destroyed. And they did it without seeking glory or recognition. That's worth remembering. When Churchill said, "Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few," he meant Hurricane pilots as much as Spitfire pilots, even if history forgot that. The Hawker Hurricane shot down more German aircraft during the Battle of Britain than all other British defences combined. It equipped more squadrons than Spitfires. It was easier to build, easier to repair, easier to fly. It was the workhorse that made RAF Fighter Command effective. Without the Hurricane, Britain would have lost, the Battle of Britain would have faced invasion or negotiated peace, and World War II would have ended differently. The Hurricane mattered more than people realise, because popular memory has erased its contribution in favour of more photogenic fighter. That erasure is historical injustice. The Hurricane saved Britain. It's time Britain and the world remembered that. The Spitfire was beautiful and beloved, and it deserved praise. But the Hurricane was practical and effective, and it deserved victory. It got victory. It deserves to be remembered for it. The Hurricane wasn't just important, it was decisive. It wasn't just part of the story, it was the biggest part. And it wasn't just one of the fighters that won the Battle of Britain, It was the fighter that won the Battle of Britain. That's the truth. And truth matters more than mythology, no matter how elegant the myth or unglamorous the truth.